I'm stuck.
You know, people are afraid of many things. There is a phobia for everything. There's even a fear of phobias, which is called phobophobia. Several years ago, there was a TV show called Fear Factor, and they put people in situations where they were afraid, and they had to do something, or they had to overcome some sort of fear that they had. And some of those were eating ketchup-covered M&Ms, not that bad. Being buried alive for 5 minutes, kind of scary. Maybe it was walking through a room full of snakes. Not sure I could do that. Hanging off the side of a cliff, not that bad. Or as simple as eating chocolate out of a diaper. Kind of a mind trick there. That'd be really gross. But see, everyone has fears, and fears are something that can control you, can make you do or not do something. And when it comes to fear, we all have cabin fever. We want to get out of this fear that we have. It's something that we all want to be free from. And you see, Moses was someone who was born into a life of fear and slavery. He was born into this, he grew up in it, and that's why he left Egypt. Is when he killed the Egyptian, he was afraid for his life, and so he ran away. But also, the Egyptians were afraid of the Israelites. We read in Exodus chapter 1,
Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave our country. So they put the slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly.
You see, the Egyptians were afraid of the Israelites, and so therefore they were cruel to them, and they enslaved them for over 400 years. But also the Israelites were afraid of the Egyptians because they were so cruel to them. They were afraid of each other. They were both bound by fear. And Moses, again, growing up in this age of fear, of learning about what everything that had happened and being afraid for his life, as I said earlier, he ran away. He left. And in Exodus chapter 3, verses 11 through 14, we read,
But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, What is his name? Then what shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you.
See, Moses had an encounter with God. And this encounter kind of fueled his fear of going back to Egypt. He was afraid. He didn't think he could speak to Pharaoh. He didn't think that he could do anything to help free the Israelites. You see, Moses had been living in Midian for 40 years. He didn't want to leave. Again, he was afraid of what people, especially Pharaoh, were going to think about what he was saying. He was also afraid of what Pharaoh might do to him because of what he was asking, because of what he was saying to him. There may be something that you are afraid of, whether it be the dark or spiders or something else. My wife Leah is afraid of something, and I want her to tell her story. So Leah, can you share a time with us when you were afraid, but then you overcame that fear?
Sure. So I was born some 33 odd years ago with a fear. And the fear is of 3 types of snakes. I am afraid of large snakes, small snakes, and sticks that look like snakes. So this fear, it's very deep within my core and my soul, and when I see a snake, my body reacts and I'm very afraid. Anyway, so this one time I'm working in my flower beds, much like I've been working hard today, and lo and behold, in my flower bed there was a snake. But my daughter, my sweet angel daughter, was playing nearby, and so I knew I had to save her from this snake. So, standing, a good distance from said snake, I summoned all my courage. I grabbed my shovel with both hands, and until I chopped it into many small pieces. And the snake, it's about that long, became about 15 pieces about that long. And that day I was heroic. I overcame my fear, I summoned my courage, and I defeat the enemy.
Great job. Thanks for sharing.
You. Yeah.
In Exodus chapter 3, verse 12, we read that God says, I will be with you. And then in Matthew chapter 28, verse 20, Jesus echoes these words. You see, you and I can be bound by fear and other things such as sin or our words or feelings, but we're ready to be free, to be unbound by this. You see, faith is doing what God wants you to do even when we are afraid. Let me say that again. Faith is doing what God wants you to do even when we are afraid, even when we are afraid to do it. Moses decided to trust God and not give in to his fear, to not let his fear control or overtake him. He decided to trust God because he knew that God was with him. And there are several places in the Bible that reiterate this point. Psalm 23:4 says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Deuteronomy 31:6 says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Psalm 118, verse 6, when I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? And one of my favorite verses, 2 Timothy 1:7, for the Spirit God gave us did not make us timid, but it gives us power and love and self-discipline. Just like Moses and Leah overcame their fear by trusting God and a shovel, God helps us overcome our fears. Again, you may be afraid of snakes or the dark or maybe being alone right now. But when we trust God, He will always give us the strength and the courage we need to overcome our fear, to be set free so that we can be unbound, so that we don't have to be controlled by our fear anymore. When it comes to fear, we all have cabin fever, but with God's help, we can overcome our fears and truly be set free.